The entire history of Middle-earth rests within these pages. I am a keeper of its oldest tales, and tonight I will share its deepest secrets with you. A complete journey from creation to the dawn of the Age of Men. You will gain a true understanding of this world's grand tapestry, its heroes and its tragedies. I wonder where you are listening from and what the hour is in your corner of the world. Each story holds immense power, capable of bringing profound comfort or stirring overwhelming wonder. So where shall we begin? With a song that created the universe, or a darkness that sought to unmake it? What does a world born from music feel like to you? Before anything else, there was only the timeless halls, a silent and boundless expanse, waiting for a single thought to give it shape. And that thought belonged to Eru, the one whom the Elves would later call Iluvatar. In that profound quiet, he first conceived the Ainur, the Holy Ones, beings of spirit and immense power, fashioned from his own mind. He did not command them into being with a word, but instead, he brought them forth with a theme of music. This was the great music, a song of pure light and intention that flowed from Iluvatar, and the Ainur gave it voice. Their harmonies were the first sounds in all of existence, and as they sang, the void began to change. The music was not merely a performance, it was an act of creation itself. The themes they sang wove together the very fabric of what would become the universe. Visions of stars, of swirling galaxies, of far-off worlds glimmering with potential, all unfolded within the music. It was a symphony of such profound beauty that its echo would resonate through every age to come. Yet into this perfect harmony, a single voice sought to rise above the others. The mightiest of the Ainur, whom Iluvatar had given the greatest gift of power and knowledge, was Melkor. He grew restless within the grand chorus, desiring to bring forth themes of his own imagining, not those that sprang from the One. So he began to weave matters of his own, devising into the music, seeking to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. This was not a melody of creation, but one of possession and domination. A harsh, repetitive discord clashed against the sacred themes, and where the music of the others built and nurtured, the themes of Melkor brought only turmoil and pain. The symphony began to fray, and the beautiful visions within it trembled and cracked. The foundations of the world, not yet fully formed, were already marked by this first great conflict, a choice that would echo for all the ages of Arda. This first discord, this choice of pride over harmony, would ripple outward into the newly formed world. The Valar, those Ainur who chose to enter the vastness of the universe, descended upon a Middle-earth that was still raw and formless, a realm of towering mountains and deep chasms shaped by the violent echoes of that primordial musical war. Their task was to prepare this world for the coming of the children of Iluvatar, the elves and men, and so they began their great labor of ordering the chaos. They raised immense mountain chains to act as the world's pillars and carved out vast basins to contain the future seas. Yet one thing was missing, a single element crucial for life to flourish: light. And so they conceived a project of breathtaking scale and hope, the creation of the two lamps. In the far north, they raised an immense pillar of stone, and upon it they set Lúthien, a lamp of silver that cast a cool, brilliant radiance. In the deepest south, they built another, and upon it placed Ormel, a lamp of gold that shone with a warm, glowing light. Where their beams met and mingled at the center of the world, there was a perpetual, gentle day, a region of everlasting spring, where lakes first formed and the earliest seeds of forests began to stir. For a time, the world was perfectly symmetrical, bathed in this divine, artificial daylight, and it seemed the Valar had finally imposed a beautiful and lasting order upon creation. But Melkor had been watching from the shadows of his northern fortress, Utumno, and the very perfection of this light fueled his envy. He could not abide this world of peace, this symbol of a harmony from which he had exiled himself. His malice festered in the deep places of the earth, and he began to plot not merely to dim the lights, but to utterly shatter them. He did not launch a subtle attack, but a cataclysm. With a force that shook the very foundations of the world, he struck the pillars of the lamps, toppling them into ruin. The silver light of Iluin and the golden glow of Ormel were extinguished in an instant, their sacred fluids flooding out to poison the newborn lands. But the true horror was the sound, a deafening crack that echoed across the entire globe, followed by a silence more profound than any the world had known. The symmetrical world was broken. The violent fall of the lamps shattered the very geography the Valar had so carefully crafted, creating new, twisted mountain ranges and seas where there had been none. And then the darkness returned, a deeper and more profound blackness for having known such radiant light. This was not the quiet void that existed before the music, but a new kind of shadow, one heavy with loss and the lingering stain of malice. The first spring of Arda was over, its beautiful center forever lost beneath the waves of a newly formed sea. This act of pure destruction forced the Valar to make a painful choice. They could not remain in Middle-earth, a land now broken and shrouded in a darkness that Melkor ruled. In retreat, they journeyed to the farthest western continent, Aman, and there they established Valinor, a new realm of light fortified against the encroaching shadow. Their departure left the wide lands of Middle-earth to the dominion of Melkor, and the world entered its first great age of struggle, a long twilight where the only light came from the distant stars. It was a sobering lesson that even the most divine and hopeful of efforts could be undone by a single, violent will. Into that silent starlight, a new awareness was born. At the shore of a lake called Cuvianan, the first elves opened their eyes. They did not arrive with a grand proclamation, but with a quiet, wondering gaze upward. The only light came from the cold, distant stars, yet to them it was a miracle. They could see, they could hear the water lapping at the shore, and they could feel the world around them as their own. Their first act was to simply name what they saw. They called themselves the Quendi, meaning those who speak with voices, and they looked upon the starry vault above and gave it a name as well, calling it the Great Dome of Heaven. For countless years, they lived by the lake, a people of peace and discovery. They learned to craft simple tools, to build shelters among the trees, and most importantly, they began to sing. Their voices, raised in unison under the stars, were the first true music to grace Middle-earth since the downfall of the lamps, a gentle, hopeful echo of the ancient music of the Aenir far away. But their innocence could not last. The shadow of Melkor stretched across the land, and his dark servants soon discovered these new, bright beings. Fear entered their hearts for the first time as some of their people began to vanish in the night, taken by unknown terrors. It was this fear that eventually reached the ears of the Valar in their distant, blessed realm. Seeing the suffering of their children, the Valar were moved to a great act of intervention. They could not allow this new light to be extinguished by the shadow, so they made a monumental decision. They would invite the elves to come to Valinor, to live with them in the undying light of the two trees, safe forever from the darkness of Middle-earth. They sent emissaries, the mightiest of the Valar, to bring this invitation. This was the beginning of the great journey, an epic trek that would test the very spirit of the elven people and forever divide their destiny. The journey was long and fraught with peril, and it revealed the first deep differences among them. Some clans, like the brave Vanyar and the skilled Noldor, were eager and unafraid, led by the Valar Oromeh through the wild lands. Others were more cautious, and one large group, the Teleri, often lagged behind, their hearts torn by the beauty of the lands they were passing through. They were the first to feel the conflict of staying or going. When the host reached a great mountain range, the Misty Mountains, a profound split occurred. One group, led by a noble elf named Lenwe, chose to abandon the journey entirely. They turned south, becoming the Nandor, the elves who would later dwell in the forests of Osiriand, and eventually become the Sylvan elves of later ages. They chose the familiar wilds of Middle-earth over the promise of a far-off paradise. The rest pressed on, but even their unity was fragile. The journey forged incredible bonds, but it also sowed the seeds of separation that would define all of elven history. The choice to leave their first home set them on a path of both immense wonder and profound sorrow. What would have happened if they had all chosen to remain under the starlight, embracing the world as they first found it? Yet even in that hallowed light, a shadow was taking shape. Melkor, the banished Vala, had not forgotten the world or its beauty. He watched from the outer darkness, his envy festering into a cold and patient hatred. He saw the bliss of the elves in Valinor, and he saw the pride of the greatest of the Noldor, a brilliant craftsman named Fëanor. It was Fëanor who had captured the light of the two trees themselves, creating 3 peerless jewels he named the Silmarils. Their light was alive, a fusion of the gold of Lorelin and the silver of Telperion, and they were the most beautiful things ever made by hand, and Melkor desired them above all else. He began to whisper, his lies drifting through the peaceful land like a subtle poison. He sowed discord among the Noldor, suggesting that the Valar had brought them to Valinor not for their protection, but to control them, to keep the lands of Middle-earth for themselves. He fed Fëanor's own pride, hinting that he, a mere elf, was the true master of the only light that mattered. The harmony of Valinor grew strained, its music faltering under the weight of suspicion and arrogance. Then, seizing his moment, Melkor struck a terrible alliance. He sought out the monstrous Ungoliant, a being of pure, ravenous darkness that took the form of a giant spider. Together, in a time of festival, when the Valar were gathered and the land was unguarded, they descended upon the unsuspecting realm. Melkor struck the trees with a black spear, and Ungoliant clambered upon them, draining their life and light, drinking their sacred sap until they were left as lifeless, withered husks. The light of the world was extinguished, not with a crash, but with a dreadful, final silence. An impenetrable gloom fell upon Valinor, a darkness so thick it was a physical weight, a suffocating unlight woven by Ungoliant herself. And in that profound blackness, Melkor went to Fëanor's stronghold, slew his father, and stole the Silmarils, fleeing back to Middle-earth with his terrible prize. The devastation was absolute. The world was plunged into a new, deeper night, and the heart of Fëanor was consumed by a grief that twisted into a rage beyond all reason. Standing before his people, he named Melkor Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world, and he swore a terrible, unbreakable oath. He and his 7 sons vowed to pursue any being, Vala, elf, or man, who would withhold a Silmaril from them. The words of that oath echoed with a doom that would haunt the ages. This was the pivotal moment, the choice that shattered paradise. To leave Valinor and pursue Morgoth, the Noldor needed ships. The Teleri, the Sea Elves, owned them, but they refused to aid in what they saw as a mad and doomed rebellion. In his fury, Fëanor led his people to the Teleri port of Alqualanda and demanded the ships. When the Teleri stood firm, the unthinkable happened. Sword was drawn against sword, elf against elf. This was the First Kinslaying, a tragedy of such profound horror that the very stones of the harbor seemed to weep. The peace of the blessed realm was irrevocably broken, stained by this act of violence. For this crime, the Valar laid a doom upon the Noldor, a prophecy of great sorrow and strife that would follow their every step. Yet Fëanor, his spirit now as hard and bright as the jewels he sought, would not turn back. He abandoned a great part of his people and sailed to Middle-earth, leaving them to make a terrible journey across a frozen wasteland. The rebellion was complete. The light was gone, an oath of vengeance had been sworn, and the elves were no longer the innocent children of starlight, but exiles carrying the seeds of a divine tragedy into the wars of a waiting world. Fëanor's choice cast a long, cold shadow across the sea. He had taken the ships, but he could not carry all his people. On the shores of Aman, he made a second, even more terrible decision. To save time and fuel his relentless pursuit, he commanded that the stolen ships sail on without the host of his own half-brother, Fingolfin, leaving them stranded on the wrong side of the ocean. The flames of those first ships set alight on the distant shore as a final, defiant act, were a bitter sight for those left behind. They were alone, exiled not just from paradise, but now from their own kin. Turning back was impossible, for the doors of Valinor were shut to them forever. Their only path forward lay to the north, toward a place of legend and dread, the Helcaraxë. This was not a bridge of land, but a vast, grinding waste of ice, connecting the 2 continents. It was a landscape of shifting flows and bottomless crevices, where the very air was a weapon of frozen shards, and the silence was broken only by the groan of continents, slowly tearing themselves apart. What kind of resolve does it take to step onto such a path, knowing it may be your last? The crossing of the grinding ice became an epic of suffering. They were not prepared for its horrors. The cold was so profound it stole the warmth from their hearts, and the wind scoured their fair faces. Many were lost, their bodies swallowed by the churning sea, or left as silent monuments encased in ice. Yet with every step, their spirit, though scarred, was tempered into something new. They were no longer the proud craftsmen of Valinor, but a people forged in hardship, their will hardened to steel. This immense loss bound them together in a shared trauma, but it also sowed a deep and lasting bitterness toward the House of Fëanor, a rift that would weaken every alliance they later forged. While Fingolfin's people endured this purgatory of ice, Fëanor's own journey ended almost as soon as it began. He landed in Middle-earth, his heart burning with a fire that the cold northern air could not quench. So swift was his rage that he marched his host toward Morgoth's stronghold of Angband, without waiting for the rest of the Noldor. In his first encounter, he and his advance guard were surrounded by Balrogs, ancient demons of fire and shadow. In the ferocious battle that followed, Fëanor was struck down, his body mortally wounded, but so potent was his spirit that it took his physical form hours to acknowledge its end. His sons recovered his body, and as they bore him away, he used his last breath to curse the name of Morgoth 3 times, his eyes still fixed on the dark towers of Thangorodrim, where his jewels were imprisoned. Thus fell the brightest of the elves, consumed by the very oath he had sworn, his quest unfulfilled. His death left a complicated legacy, a warning of how pride and obsession can unravel even the greatest of beings. The fate of the Noldor was now inextricably bound to the cold light of the Silmarils, a treasure they could never reclaim but could never abandon, a legacy of fire and ice that would dictate every coming conflict. A new light was about to dawn, one that did not come from a lamp or a tree. As the Noldor fortified their realms in Beleriand, a star rose in the east, and for the first time, the sun journeyed across the sky. Its warm, golden rays touched a land far to the east called Hildorian, and there, the second children of Iluvatar opened their eyes. They did not awaken to starlight like the elves, but to the dawn. Their first sight was the brilliant, hopeful sun, and from that moment, their lives were measured by its rising and setting. They were the race of men. Their beginnings were humble. They built simple shelters from wood and stone, learned to till the earth, and formed the first small communities bound by family and tribe. Unlike the elves, who were immortal and unchanging, these new beings felt the press of time. They saw the seasons turn with a poignant urgency, and this awareness of life's fleeting beauty drove them to build, to create, and to seek their place in a world already filled with ancient powers. They were wanderers and seekers by nature, and their journeys eventually brought them west, into the great land of Beleri, and where the elves waged their unending war. The elves first called them the Atani, the second people, and watched their arrival with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Here were beings of such vibrant, brief passion. An elf could master a craft over 1,000 years, perfecting it with patient grace. A man, feeling the years slip through his fingers like sand, would pour his entire heart into a single lifetime of work, creating things of startling, if fragile, beauty. This difference could have bred distrust, but instead, it forged a powerful bond. The elven king Finrod Felagund, wandering one night, came upon a camp of these mortals. He did not reveal himself at first, but simply sat and listened to their songs, which were full of longing for light and a fear of the dark. He saw their courage, and he saw their need. From that moment, an alliance was born. The men who chose to stand with the elves were given lands and honors. Their strength and swiftness in battle became a new weapon against the enduring might of Morgoth. Yet this decision to enter the war was not without its profound cost. To fight alongside the Eldar was to step onto a stage where tragedies unfolded over centuries, where a single battle could be lost and refought for generations. For a race that lived and died in the span of a few decades, this was an almost unimaginable sacrifice. They brought their mortal courage into a conflict of gods, and in doing so, they intertwined their destiny with the elder race forever. This partnership revealed the strange and poignant nature of the gift of men. The elves were bound to the world for as long as it lasted, their fates tied to the very rings of its history. But to men, Iluvatar had given a different path. Their spirits were not confined to the world, but would leave it after their time was over, passing to a destiny beyond even the understanding of the Valar. The elves saw this not as a curse, but as a profound mystery. To them, mortality was the true gift, a release from the weariness of the world. Yet in the heat of battle, facing the terror of Morgoth's legions, that gift must have felt like a fragile, fleeting flame. The stakes of the war were now irrevocably changed. It was no longer just a story of immortal rebels seeking lost jewels. It had become a story of sacrifice, of kingdoms built and lost within a single lifetime, of a bravery made all the more powerful because it was offered in the face of an ending. The fate of Middle-earth now rested not only on the timeless resolve of the elves, but on the bold, desperate hearts of mortals. So the Noldor chose a path of immense patience, surrounding the dark peaks of Thangorodrim with a great circle of steel and vigilance. This was the Siege of Angband, a military strategy that stretched not for years, but for nearly 400 years. Imagine the sheer willpower required to maintain such a watch, a slow, grinding war of attrition against an enemy who never slept. The elven kingdoms built watchtowers and mighty fortresses along the northern mountains, their soldiers standing guard through countless cycles of sun and moon. For a time, it seemed to work. The lands south of the siege grew green and peaceful, and the elves, alongside their mortal allies, built great halls and cities of surpassing beauty. Gondolin, the hidden city, was raised in a secluded valley. Nargothrond was delved deep into stone, and the men of the House of Bear and the House of Hador were granted wide lands to call their own. Yet this long peace was an illusion, a thin crust over a simmering volcano. Morgoth was not idle in his deep dungeons. He was experimenting, breeding new and terrible forms of life in the dark. While the elves watched the passes, he was forging his ultimate weapon, a reserve of fire and terror held back for a single, shattering blow. The tension of those centuries is almost unimaginable. Every sunrise that passed without an attack was both a relief and a weight, adding to the slow drain on hope and resources. How do you keep your edge, your readiness, when the war you are fighting is measured in the lifetimes of entire human dynasties? The stalemate could not last forever. Morgoth's counterstroke, when it came, was a cataclysm. He began by unleashing rivers of fire that erupted from the Iron Mountains, a wave of flame called the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. This was not an assault of armies, but a weapon of pure geological terror. The green plains of Ardgalen were scorched into a permanent wasteland of ash and cinders, renamed Anfaglith, the gasping dust. The carefully maintained siege lines were broken in a single day. The great fortresses of the elves, which had stood for centuries, were suddenly isolated and besieged. King Fingolfin, in a rage of despair and defiance, rode alone to the very gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat. He fought with a heroism that is still sung of, wounding the Dark Lord 7 times before he was ultimately overcome. His death was a devastating blow to the morale of the entire alliance. The Dagor Bragollach marked a terrible turning point. The initiative passed irrevocably to the enemy. The high hopes of the Noldor were broken, their kingdoms now just isolated points of light in a rapidly darkening world. It revealed a hard truth, that even the most perfect strategy and the mightiest alliance can be undone by an enemy whose patience and resources are literally bottomless. This was no longer a war they could win through strength of arms alone. The shadow was deepening, and the only hope that remained lay in a desperate quest, or an unforeseen intervention from across the sea. Yet in the midst of this deepening shadow, a single love story kindled a flame that would outshine the despair. It began not with a king or a warrior, but with a mortal man named Beren, the last survivor of his slaughtered house, living as an outlaw in the haunted forests of Doriath. And it was there that he saw Lúthien Tinuvil, daughter of the elven king Thingol, dancing in a moonlit glade. In that moment, his weary heart was utterly lost. Her father, enraged that a mortal dared to love his daughter, set a bride price of impossible cruelty. Beren must bring him a Silmaril from Morgoth's iron crown. It was a sentence of death disguised as a quest, a demand meant to shatter the man's hope and end the unsuitable union, but Beren accepted without hesitation. His journey took him through monstrous perils, and he was captured by Sauron himself, the great lieutenant of Morgoth, in the dread tower of Tol Ingohath. There, in a dungeon of despair, his fate seemed sealed, but Lúthien was not merely a princess waiting in a guarded palace. Her love was a force of nature. Defying her father, she escaped her woodland prison, and with the aid of the great hound Huan, she fought her way to Sauron's very gates. She did not challenge him with a sword, but with a power older and more potent. She sang a song of such profound loss and such pure love that the foundations of his tower shook. Her magic unwove his own, his werewolves fled, and his power broke. Sauron, defeated by an elven maiden's song, was forced to abandon his form and flee in shame, releasing Beren from the darkness. Their courage did not end there. Together, man and elf, they walked openly into the very heart of the enemy's domain, the throne room of Morgoth in Angband. Using a cloak of shadow and a spell of sleep woven from Lúthien's voice, they stood before the slumbering Dark Lord. With a knife, Beren carefully cut a single Silmaril from the Iron Crown. It was an act of such breathtaking audacity that it echoed through the halls of fate itself. In that moment, they proved that love and cunning could succeed where entire armies had failed for centuries. Their triumph, however, was touched by the doom that followed all things connected to the jewels. As they fled, a monstrous wolf attacked, and Beren's hand, clutching the Silmaril, was bitten off and swallowed. The prize was won, but at a terrible cost. Beren later laid the recovered jewel before Thingol, a handless man, fulfilling an impossible task. Yet the true consequence was the choice Lúthien had made. In loving a mortal, she had chosen a mortal's fate. When Beren was later slain, her spirit faded from grief, and she stood before the throne of Mandos in the halls of waiting, and there she sang a song of such pity for the love of elves and men that the Valar were moved to a unique act of grace. They were both restored to life, but as mortals, bound together until the end of their days. This bittersweet union forever changed the relationship between the two races. It was the first great intermingling, a testament that the world's deepest divisions could be bridged by the heart's courage. The story of Beren and Lúthien became a legend within a legend, a single, perfect jewel of hope, proving that even in the deepest darkness, love could challenge the most absolute power. Even the hidden city could not remain forever veiled from the Dark Lord's gaze. A lone figure, chewer of the House of Hador, was guided by the Vala of the Sea, Ulmo, through secret ways to its gleaming gates. His was a mission of dire warning, a final chance for the city to prepare for the storm he sensed gathering. King Turgon, proud and secure in his mountain fastness, heard the message from the Lord of Waters, a plea to abandon the city and lead his people back to the sea. But the heart of a king is bound to his throne, and the beauty of Gondolin, with its white towers and crystalline fountains, was a treasure he could not bear to forsake. He chose to trust in walls and secrecy over a perilous flight into the unknown, a decision that would seal the fate of every soul within. The betrayal came from within their own ranks, as Ulmo had foreseen. The king's own nephew, Mieglin, captured and broken by promises of power and a twisted love, revealed the hidden paths to Morgoth's commanders. The assault was not a mere army at the gates. It was an avalanche of calculated malice. Dragons of fire, the first of their kind, crawled up the mountainsides, their scales impervious to arrow and spear. Balrogs of shadow and flame leapt among the white towers, and endless legions of orcs poured into the streets. The defense was one of desperate, heartbreaking valor. Every plaza became a killing field, every courtyard a final stand. Yet for every orc that fell, 3 more took its place, and the great walls, which had stood for centuries, crumbled under the relentless assault. The city Turgon had refused to leave became a funeral pyre, its glorious structures melting under dragon fire, its gardens trampled into mud and blood. In the final chaos, as hope was all but extinguished, a small band of survivors fought their way through a secret passage in the mountains. Chuer and his wife Idril, Turgon's daughter, led this desperate exodus, carrying with them a tiny, precious hope, their young son, Eärendil. The fall of the last great elven kingdom sent a shockwave through the world. It proved that no refuge, no matter how well hidden or beautifully built, was safe from the creeping tendrils of despair and betrayal. The survivors carried with them not just the memory of loss, but the living seed of a future that even Morgoth could not foresee. From the ashes of a perfect city, a new and greater hope would have to be born, one that looked not inward to hidden valleys, but outward, across the vast and unexplored sea. That small flicker of hope, the child Eärendil, grew into a man with the weight of 2 worlds upon his shoulders. He was the living bridge, his heart a mix of mortal courage and elven grace, and he could feel the slow, suffocating darkness pressing in on all of Middle-earth. With his wife Elwing, who held a treasure more perilous than any crown, he made a choice that defied the laws of gods and men. He would build a ship, Vingalot, and sail into the uttermost west, a path forbidden to mortals and exiled elves alike, to plead for mercy before the throne of the Valar. This was not a quest for personal glory, but a desperate cry for help from a world on the brink of being extinguished. The seas he charted were not on any map, a terrifying expanse of shadow and enchantment, where many before him had been lost. What drives a person to sail knowingly into such certain peril? Not for a prize, but for the slim chance of appealing to a higher power. His voyage was an act of ultimate sacrifice, a gamble that his mixed heritage might grant him a hearing where a pure elf or a pure man would be turned away. After a journey fraught with perils that tested the very limits of his spirit, his ship finally broke through the mists and beached upon the shores of Valinor. He stood alone on that hallowed ground, a supplicant in a land from which his people had been banished. He did not demand, he did not boast of his lineage or his suffering. Instead, he fell to his knees and pleaded. He spoke of the centuries of loss, of the rivers of tears shed by elves and men, of the countless lives ground to dust under the tyranny of Morgoth. He begged for pity, for intervention, for a final end to the long defeat. His wife Elwing, in a moment of parallel destiny, had also made a choice. When the sons of Fëanor attacked their haven to claim the Silmaril she possessed, she faced an impossible decision. Rather than let the jewel fall again into a cycle of violence, she fled to a high cliff and, with the jewel clasped to her breast, cast herself into the roaring sea. But the Valar would not let this story end in tragedy. The Silmaril did not sink. Instead, a great power transformed Elwing into a white seabird, and she flew across the ocean to reunite with her husband, the jewel once more a beacon of hope. Moved by this profound love and the sheer desperation of Eärendil's plea, the Valar at last relented. Their judgment was swift and absolute. They would go to war. The host they assembled was unlike anything Middle-earth had ever witnessed, a force of the Maiar and the Vanyar elves who had never known the taint of the world's marring. This was the War of Wrath, and it was less a battle and more a geological event. The very continent of Beleriand became the battlefield. Mountains were thrown down as mere rubble, and vast plains were swallowed by the churning sea. The conflict escalated to a truly cosmic scale, with the great eagles of Man, while fighting winged dragons in the skies above, and the ground shaking with the footsteps of the Valar's champions. In the final confrontation, Eärendil himself, sailing the heavens in his ship Vingalot, with the Silmaril bound to his brow, faced the greatest of the dragons, Ankalagan the Black. Their duel in the high air was a turning point, and when Eärendil prevailed, the colossal dragon fell from the sky, his ruin shattering the very towers of Thangorodrim. Morgoth, his armies broken and his fortresses demolished, was at last brought forth in chains. His reign of ages was over. The victory was total, but its cost was the world they had fought to save. The land of Beleriand, already broken by centuries of conflict, could not withstand the final fury of this war. It fractured and sank beneath the waves, leaving only scattered islands and a new western coastline as a memorial to all that had been lost. The first age of the world ended not with a whisper, but with the roar of a continent drowning. For his pivotal role, Eärendil was granted a unique destiny. He and his ship were set to sail the starry paths of the sky, the Silmaril on his brow becoming the evening and morning star, a permanent sign of hope for all who dwell below. Yet this divine resolution came with its own poignant echo of the old tragedies. The two remaining Silmarils, wrested from Morgoth's crown, were still subject to the terrible Oath of Fëanor. His last two sons, bound by a promise they could not break, stole the jewels, but their hands were now unclean, stained by betrayal and kinslaying, and the hallowed jewels burned them. One cast his Silmaril into a fiery chasm, the other into the deep sea, so the last of the sacred light was lost to the world, one buried in earth, one sunk in water, and one shining in the sky, forever out of reach. The war was won. The great enemy was thrust out into the timeless void, but the scars ran deep, and the world was left forever changed, its fate now passing into the hands of those who would build anew upon the ruins. From the drowned lands of Beleriand, a new star rose not in the sky, but upon the sea. The Valar, moved by the immense sacrifices of the Edain, the three houses of men who had stood faithfully with the Elves, prepared for them a reward beyond any mortal dream. They raised a great island from the depths of the ocean, situated between the shores of Middle-earth and the undying lands of the west. This was the Isle of Elena, shaped like a five-pointed star, and upon it they built the realm of Númenor. To its first ruler, Elros, son of Eärendil and brother to the immortal Elrond, they granted a choice that would define his people for millennia. He chose the fate of men, and with it, a lifespan of many centuries, a kingly line blessed with long life and wisdom. For their loyalty in the wars against darkness, they were given a land of surpassing beauty, with rolling hills, fertile plains, and a mountain so tall its peak was named Meneltarma, the Pillar of Heaven. The Númenóreans were not mere settlers, they were master builders. Their cities were marvels of white stone and graceful arches, their harbors filled with ships of such elegant design that they seemed to fly over the water rather than sail upon it. They became the greatest mariners the world had ever known, exploring every coast of Middle-earth, not as conquerors, but as teachers and helpers. They brought knowledge of craft and agriculture to the lesser men who had been left behind in the shadow, and for long years they were revered as lords and benefactors. Yet this golden age was framed by a single, solemn decree from the Valar, a law known as the Ban. While the Númenóreans were permitted to sail anywhere they wished, they were forbidden from ever steering their vessels into the uttermost west, toward the site of the blessed realm. This was not a punishment, but a protection. The undying lands were not meant for mortal hearts, and to dwell there was to invite a slow, unbearable weariness, a fading of the spirit. The ban was a boundary set by love, a way to preserve the unique and precious gift of their mortality. For many generations, this wisdom was understood and honored. The kings and people of Númenor would sail east to Middle-earth, but they always turned their prows away from the setting sun. Their gratitude for the gift of their island home was profound, and they lived in a state of unparalleled prosperity and peace. But how does a civilization react when its every ambition has been fulfilled? What happens when there are no more lands to explore, no more skills to master, and the only frontier left is the one forbidden to you? A shadow began to grow, not from without, but from within the human heart. The very longevity that was their blessing began to feed a deep-seated fear. They called it the ban, but in their private thoughts, some began to call it a prison. Why should they, the mighty, be denied what the elves were granted freely? This seed of discord found its most fertile ground after the rise of Sauron in Middle-earth. Having survived the downfall of his master, the lieutenant of Morgoth began to weave his own web of power, and he saw in the pride of Númenor his greatest tool. He allowed himself to be taken as a prisoner to their splendid capital, Armanelos, and there, with honeyed words, he twisted their noble pride into a venomous arrogance. He spoke to the king, Ar-Pharazôn, of the injustice of the ban, whispering that a lord of such immense power should not be subject to the laws of distant gods. He poisoned their culture, turning their reverence for their ancestors into a cult of death, and he convinced them that their true enemy was not the darkness in the east, but the Valar in the west, who withheld the gift of eternal life. The stakes of this internal conflict became cosmic. The divine favor that had raised their island from the sea was now pitted directly against a mortal ambition, stoked by the greatest deceiver of the age. The fate of Númenor hung in the balance, a majestic civilization perched on the edge of a choice that would echo through the very foundations of the world. The shadow first appeared not as a storm, but as a subtle shift in the wind. The great ships of Númenor, once welcomed as bearers of knowledge and light, began to cast a different kind of silhouette upon the shores of Middle-earth. Their helpful colonies slowly hardened into forts of domination. Where they had once taught, they now taxed. Where they had once lifted up, they now looked down, their hearts filling with a new and troubling sentiment, a belief in their own inherent superiority over the lesser men who aged and died so swiftly. This was the first crack in their noble foundation, a pride born from the very gifts that were meant to humble them. The most corrosive fear, however, was not for their power, but for their own end. Their long lives, a blessing that spanned centuries, became a cruel measuring stick against the inevitable. They watched their own vibrant strength slowly wane, and the thought of this gift being revoked by death grew into an all-consuming dread. They began to call the ban of the Valar not a protection, but a theft, a denial of the immortality they felt they deserved. Into this deepening unease stepped a prisoner who would become a kingmaker. Sauron, perceiving the rot within their pride, allowed himself to be taken to their glorious capital, not in chains of defeat, but as a strategist, playing a final, brilliant hand. He bowed before King Ar-Pharazôn, not as a captive, but as a willing counselor, his words a subtle poison that tasted like wisdom. He did not speak of darkness, but of light, a light he claimed was being unjustly withheld. He asked the king a question that would echo through the halls of fate. Why should the ruler of the greatest civilization in the world be subject to the laws of distant powers? Why should he, Ar-Pharazôn, fade and die when the undying shores lay just beyond the horizon? He twisted their reverence for their ancestors into a morbid cult, focused only on the tomb, teaching them to fear the end rather than to honor the life that came before. The spiritual decay was now complete. The conflict was no longer between Númenor and a foreign enemy, but within the soul of its people, a civil war between their ancient reverence and this new, intoxicating rebellion. The king's heart, swollen with a pride that mistook itself for strength, made the decision that would define his legacy. He would challenge the ban. He would take what he believed was his. The shipyards of Númenor, which had once produced vessels of exploration and grace, now echoed with the sounds of a different purpose. They were building an armada, a fleet of war so immense its masts were said to resemble a moving forest upon the sea. This was not a journey of discovery, but an act of ultimate defiance, a military expedition aimed at the very heart of the divine. The consequences of this choice were already unfolding in the spiritual decay of a once great people. Their cities of white stone still shone in the sun, but a shadow had fallen across their hearts. The stakes were no longer about land or power, but about the fundamental order of the world, a rebellion that was sailing directly toward a retribution, the likes of which the world had never seen. That immense fleet, a forest of masts and golden sails, did not sail toward any mortal shore. Ar-Pharazôn, the Golden, steered his armada west into the sunset with a single blasphemous purpose: to lay claim to the undying lands and seize the immortality he believed was his by right. As the white shores of Valinor came into view, a profound silence fell. The Valar did not raise their armies to meet him. They laid down their governance and called upon Eru, the one to whom all power truly belonged. They stepped aside, and the creator of the universe intervened directly. The world was broken and remade in a single, breathtaking moment. The seas rose up in a titanic wave, a wall of water that dwarfed the highest mountains of Middle-earth. The foundations of the world shifted, and the flat earth, which had existed since the music of the Aenir, was bent into a globe, a sphere that would forever separate the realms of mortals from the undying west. From that day forward, any mariner who sailed too far would only circle the curved world, never again finding the straight path that led to Valinor. And at the epicenter of this divine cataclysm was Númenor itself. The Star Isle, the most glorious kingdom of men, was not merely flooded, it was swallowed. The ocean yawned open, and the entire island, with its towering cities, its lush fields, and its prideful king, was dragged down into a churning abyss. The roaring of the water and the screams of the drowning were lost in a greater sound, the sound of the world itself groaning as its shape was permanently altered. In a single day, an entire civilization, with all its knowledge, its art, and its power, was erased from the face of the earth, leaving only a memory and a new, empty sea in its place. This was not a punishment meted out by vengeful gods, but the natural consequence of a chord of discord, so profound it could not be contained within the existing music of the world. Ar-Pharazôn and his host, standing on the forbidden shore, were not slain by sword or spell. They were buried under falling hills, imprisoned in the caves of the forgotten, until the final breaking of the world and the last battle. Their ambition became their tomb, yet even in this utter ruin, a flicker of the old nobility remained. A small group, known as the Faithful, had foreseen this folly. Led by Eärendil, a lord of royal lineage who had kept the old ways and rejected Sauron's lies, they had prepared. As the cataclysm began, they managed to launch 9 ships into the raging seas, their vessels tossed upon a tidal wave of destruction. They were refugees from a paradise lost, carrying with them few treasures, but among them were the 7 stones of the Dunedain and a seedling of the white tree of Númenor, a living symbol of their lineage. After weeks of terror upon the waves, their ships were cast upon the shores of Middle-earth. They landed in the northwest, a land that had once been their colony. There, in the shadow of this immense loss, they forged new kingdoms from the wilderness. Eärendil founded the realm of Arnor in the north, while his sons, Isildur and Anarion, established Gondor in the south. These were the realms in exile, built not on pride, but on humility and the hard-won wisdom of catastrophe. They were a diminished people, a remnant, but in their hearts they carried the memory of a lost glory and a solemn warning for all ages to come. The downfall of Númenor stands as the defining tragedy of the Second Age, a stark lesson on the peril of confusing power with right, and the cosmic cost of defying a divine order meant not to limit, but to protect. The world was made round, and the path to the west was lost, all because a king could not accept the beautiful, fleeting gift of his own mortality. From the wreckage of a drowned world, the heirs of Númenor carved kingdoms of stone and memory. Eärendil the Tall, leader of the faithful, founded the realm of Arnor in the green, rolling hills of the north, while his sons, Isildur and Anarion, established the southern stronghold of Gondor. These were not mere settlements, but living monuments to all that had been lost, built with the skill and wisdom of a greater age. Their cities rose as bastions against the growing shadow in the east, for Sauron, though his fair form was destroyed in the cataclysm, had endured. His spirit fled back to Middle-earth, and he slowly regathered his strength in the dark land of Mordor, a fortress realm shielded by ashen mountains. The Dunedain knew their very existence was a challenge to him, a reminder of the old alliance that had once broken his master. They razed the white city of Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun, and its sister, Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, as sentinels watching the passes into Mordor. In the north, the city of Anúminas was built beside the serene waters of Lake Nanuil, its grandeur a testament to a lineage that would not be extinguished. Yet the shadow was patient, and it tested their defenses. Sauron, seeing that the Númenorian exiles were the greatest obstacle to his dominion, launched a sudden and ferocious assault. His forces captured the fair Minas Ithil, driving out Isildur and defiling the tower, which was renamed Minas Morgul, the Tower of Black Sorcery. The conflict was no longer a distant threat. It was a war for the soul of Middle-earth. This act of aggression forced the hands of the Dunedain kings. Eärendil and Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, formed an alliance of such scale it had not been seen since the War of Wrath. Elves and men, the two kindreds bound by ancient friendship and shared loss, joined their armies into a single host, the last alliance. It was a final, desperate effort to break the power of the Dark Lord before it could envelop the entire world. The march of that alliance was a sight to behold, a river of bright mail and sharp spears flowing across the land toward the very gates of Mordor. They laid a siege upon the Dark Lord's fortress for 7 long years, a grueling test of endurance against an enemy who commanded the very earth and stone. The final battle upon the plain of Gorgoroth was a maelstrom of fire and steel, where heroes and monsters clashed in a conflict that would define an age. In that titanic struggle, Eärendil and Gil-galad themselves faced Sauron in single combat. The fight was catastrophic, and though Sauron was overthrown, both kings were slain, their lives spent to create an opening for victory. It was then that Isildur, with his father's broken sword, took up the hilt and cut the one ring from Sauron's hand. The Dark Lord's form was unmade, his spirit scattering into the shadows, and his armies fled in disarray. The war was won, but at a cost that would echo for ages. The alliance was shattered by the loss of its great leaders, and the victory, though total, felt incomplete. Isildur, standing amid the ruin, held the ultimate prize, the Ring of Power, in his palm. He was given a choice: to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom and end the threat forever, or to keep it as a were-guild for his father's death. In that single, fateful moment, the seeds for all future conflicts were sown. What does it mean to win a war, yet lose the peace that was meant to follow? That victory on the slopes of Mount Doom was paid for with a terrible and permanent price. The last alliance, a final, glorious union of elves and men, was shattered by the loss of its twin pillars. Eärendil and Gil-galad lay dead, their lives spent to break the Dark Lord's physical form. In that moment of utter desolation, with the cries of battle fading around him, Isildur stood over his fallen father. His hand closed not around a weapon of war, but around the ultimate prize, the One Ring, still warm from Sauron's hand. The power of the artifact was immediate and subtle, speaking not to his greed, but to his grief. It whispered to him of a weregild, a payment of blood for the loss of his father and his king. It presented itself not as a tool of darkness, but as a rightful heirloom of his house, a symbol of the immense sacrifice his people had just made. So when the voice of the elven Lord Círdan and the Council of Elrond urged him to cast the ring into the cracks of doom, to end the threat forever, he refused. He claimed it as his own. It was a decision made in a haze of sorrow and exhaustion, a human choice that would echo through the long centuries to come, a single point of failure in an otherwise perfect victory. The ring had survived its master's fall. Sauron was defeated, his armies scattered, but the very heart of his power was not destroyed. It was merely lost, a seed of evil lying dormant, waiting for the day its master's spirit would gather enough strength to call it home. The war was over, but the shadow was never truly gone. It simply receded, biding its time, leaving the world with a fragile and uncertain peace. The long peace that followed was a quiet, dwindling thing. With Sauron's defeat, the elves felt their purpose in Middle-earth slowly drawing to a close. One by one, their havens grew quieter, their ships sailing west from the gray havens, until only a scattered few remained as keepers of ancient memory. In the north, the great kingdom of Arnor, founded by Eärendil himself, could not hold against the slow erosion of time and the quiet persistence of its enemies. It fractured into 3 smaller, bickering realms, and one by one, their proud cities fell into ruin, their glory remembered only in song and crumbling stone. The world was entering its twilight years, the Third Age, an era defined not by epic alliances, but by a slow, patient watchfulness. What becomes of a people when their grand destiny seems to have passed them by? The Dunedain of the North made a choice of profound humility. They laid aside their crowns and their titles, becoming the Rangers of the North, a secret people wandering the wilds. To the common folk of Bree or the Shire, they were just grim, solitary figures, a fleeting shadow under the trees. But their true purpose was a solemn vigil, a promise made generations before to guard the lands where the heir of Isildur still lived, unknown and unprotected. They fought a forgotten war against the small, creeping evils that never slept, buying peace for others with their own anonymity. This was the consequence of Isildur's ancient choice, a kingdom lost but a lineage preserved, a strength that persisted not in fortresses, but in the resilience of the human spirit. The grand stage of kings and elves had faded, but the quiet, desperate courage of a few hidden guardians became the thin, unbroken line that held the final shadow at bay. The cold crept south from the northern waste, a chill that had little to do with the weather. In the gaunt highlands, a sorcerer king raised his black banner, founding a realm with a single, venomous purpose. This was the Witch King of Angmar, the greatest of the 9 ringwraiths, and his gaze was fixed upon the fractured remains of Arnor. His war was not one of conquest, but of annihilation, a calculated campaign to extinguish the last vestiges of the Dunedain kingdom in the north. He launched his assaults with a relentless, grinding rhythm, probing the defenses of the 3 divided successor states. His armies were not just orcs and men of the hills, but things of shadow and fear, their forms twisted by a sorcery that poisoned the very earth they marched upon. The noble cities of the Dunedain, already weakened by internal strife, found themselves besieged by a foe who understood the art of despair. One by one, their strongholds faltered. The elves of Lindon and Rivendell, watching this northern shadow swell, knew they could not stand apart. In a fragile alliance born of necessity, their forces marched to join with the last standing Dunedain kingdom of Arthedain. For a time, this union of elves and men held the darkness at bay, a flicker of the old glory of the last alliance, but the Witch King's patience was as deep as his malice. He waited and he watched, and when the alliance was at its most strained, he unleashed his full might. The final battle broke the kingdom of Arthedain forever. Its last king fell, its cities were cast down, and its people were scattered to the winds. The realm of Arnor was no more. From its ashes, the Dunedain of the north did not vanish. They became the Rangers, a wandering people sworn to protect the lands they could no longer rule. They lived as protectors in the wild, their true names and heritage a secret kept from those they guarded. This long defeat in the north proved a terrible truth, that Sauron's reach was long and his servants relentless. Even from the shadows, his will could orchestrate the fall of kingdoms, ensuring that no peace, however hard won, could ever be truly permanent. The shadow in Dol Guldur festered for centuries, a patient poison seeping into the roots of the great forest. Against this creeping threat, the wisest minds of the age knew that isolated vigilance was no longer enough. They formed the White Council, a gathering of powers unseen since the fall of the last alliance. Its members were the great lords of the Elves, like Elrond and Galadriel, and the mysterious Istari, the wizards sent from the west, whose purpose was not to command, but to guide and to counsel. Their unity was a formidable shield, yet their debates revealed a deep schism in strategy. The central conflict was one of timing. Saruman, the White, head of their order, consistently argued for caution and further study. He believed any direct assault was premature, a rash move that might reveal their strength before they fully understood the enemies. He counseled patience, a strategy that felt like an action to others. But Gandalf the Grey, ever more attuned to the subtleties of the world's heart, grew increasingly certain. He had ventured into the dark fortress himself and sensed a familiar, ancient malice at its core. He argued that the necromancer was none other than Sauron himself, gathering his strength anew, and that every year of delay only made their foe stronger. The council's meetings became a tense theater of diplomacy and disagreement, a clash not of swords, but of philosophies. This internal conflict meant that for many long years, the council watched and debated, while the shadow in Mirkwood grew. Finally, the evidence became undeniable. They moved against Dol Guldur in a coordinated strike of immense power, driving the shadow from its stronghold. Sauron, exposed and forced to abandon his lair, fled eastward. This victory, however, was a double-edged sword. While they had cleansed the forest for a time, they had also served the Dark Lord a crucial purpose. Their assault confirmed his greatest suspicion, that the wise were not only vigilant, but organized. He now knew his enemies were watching, and he knew exactly where to go to prepare his final war. He returned to his ancient realm of Mordor, and there, openly, he began to rebuild his power. The Council's hard-won victory had not ended the threat. It had merely clarified the battlefield. They had traded a hidden enemy for a declared one, and in doing so, they started the final, inexorable countdown to a war that would decide the fate of all Middle-earth. A forgotten kingdom lay sleeping under a mountain, its halls silent but for the rustle of golden coins and the slow, fiery breath of a dragon. For generations, the dwarves of Erebor had lived as exiles, their home lost to the wrath of the great worm Smaug. Their king, Thorin Oakenshield, carried the weight of this loss not as a memory, but as a burning purpose. He would not let his people's legacy end in wandering and want. His plan was one of breathtaking audacity, not a grand army, but a small company of 13 dwarves and one very unlikely participant. He sought not a warrior, but a burglar, and his gaze fell upon the most comfortable and predictable creature in all of Middle-earth, a hobbit of the Shire named Bilbo Baggins. This was not a quest born of certain victory, but of desperate hope, a single, slim chance to outwit a legend and reclaim a stolen throne. What kind of courage does it take to leave your warm hearth and step onto a road filled with such monumental peril? The chain of events Thorin set in motion would ripple outward, touching every corner of the world. Their journey was a tapestry of narrow escapes, from the goblin tunnels deep under the misty mountains to the enchanted and perilous forest of Mirkwood. It was there, lost and desperate, that Bilbo stumbled upon a simple, golden ring in the dark, a discovery that seemed a stroke of luck at the time, but would one day overshadow the very mountain they sought. When the company finally reached the lonely mountain, Bilbo's role shifted from burglar to diplomat, facing the terrifying consciousness of Smaug himself. The dragon was not a mere beast, but a creature of cunning and immense pride, his words a weapon as sharp as his claws. Bilbo's riddles in the dark revealed the dragon's one vulnerable spot, a small patch missing from his gem, encrusted underbelly, a crucial piece of information that would seal the creature's fate. The conflict with Smaug did not end with dwarven axes, but with a single black arrow fired by a mortal man, Bard of Lake Town, who understood the dragon's threat to his own people. Smaug's fiery downfall was a spectacle of terrible beauty, a cleansing fire that also brought ruin, setting the stage for a different kind of battle. With the dragon gone, the treasure of Erebor lay unguarded, a glittering hoard that drew the eyes of many claimants. Elves, men, and a host of dwarves all converged upon the mountain, their alliance fraying over the division of the wealth. Just as conflict seemed inevitable, a far greater threat emerged from the north, a vast army of goblins and wargs intent on crushing all the free peoples at once. The ensuing battle of the 5 armies was a chaotic, brutal affair, where former rivals fought side by side for survival. Thorin Oakenshield, having finally reclaimed his kingdom, fought with a kingly fury, paying for his homeland with his own life in a sacrifice that cemented the peace. His death was a poignant end to his long quest, a reminder that some prizes are won at the highest cost. The Dwarven Kingdom was restored, a beacon of strength and craftsmanship in the northern world, and the lands surrounding it entered a new era of prosperity. Yet the most momentous consequence of the entire adventure was tucked away in Bilbo's pocket, utterly unnoticed by the great lords and generals. The simple ring he had found in the dark, won through a game of riddles with the creature Gollum, was now returning to the world. Its journey from a forgotten cave to a cozy hobbit hole in the Shire was the quiet beginning of the world's final and most desperate struggle. Thorin's quest had achieved its glorious aim, but in doing so, it had inadvertently brought the One Ring and its terrible destiny back into play. Yet even the great forest of Mirkwood, a place of ancient and living light, began to feel the chill of a distant, patient malice. Its southern reaches grew dense and tangled, the air turning heavy with a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The elves of the woodland realm, led by their steadfast King Thranduil, watched this creeping blight with a profound and growing unease. Their patrols along the forest's borders became more frequent, their vigilance a quiet, desperate war against a shadow they could not fully grasp. They could feel it in the trees, a subtle poison seeping into the roots, turning whispers of wind into murmurs of dread. Thranduil, a king who had witnessed the fall of kingdoms, made a fateful decision for the protection of his people. He drew his borders tight, sealing his halls with enchantment and withdrawing his presence from the wider troubles of the world. It was a choice born of a protective love, but also of a deep-seated weariness, a desire to preserve one last island of elven light from the encroaching gloom. This self-imposed isolation kept his realm safe, but it also meant turning inward, building walls not just of stone and magic, but of the heart. The wider world would have to face its perils without the full strength of the woodland elves, a consequence that would ripple through the coming conflicts. Yet even in their seclusion, they could not entirely escape the shadow's reach. Their vigilance led to a crucial, if unsettling, discovery. Their patrols captured a wretched, golem-voiced creature, a twisted thing of bone and pallid skin, skulking along the banks of the enchanted stream. This was Gollum, pulled from his dark holes beneath the mountains. In holding him, Thranduil's people unwittingly became jailers to a vital piece of the enemy's puzzle. Through guarded questioning, they gleaned whispers of a lost ring, a precious thing that spoke of a power stirring in the abandoned fortress of Dol Guldur. This was not a grand battle, but a quiet gathering of intelligence, a single thread of knowledge pulled from the darkness. It proved that the shadow was not merely spreading, but actively seeking, its tendrils probing every corner of Middle-earth for the one thing that could restore its master to full strength. The fate of the world now hinged on these small, desperate acts, the watchful eyes of the elves in a darkening wood, and the terrible secret held by a broken creature in their dungeons. Deep in the goblin tunnels under the misty mountains, a small hobbit's hand closed around a simple, golden band. Bilbo Baggins, lost and alone in the absolute dark, had no thought of destiny or power. He only knew the cold of the stone floor and a desperate need to find his way out. He slipped the ring into his pocket as a simple trinket, a piece of luck in a terrifying place. That single, unthinking act would one day determine the fate of every kingdom in Middle-earth. Soon after, he met the creature Gollum, a twisted being who lived in the dark and spoke to himself in two separate voices. They played a game of riddles for Bilbo's life, a contest of wits in the echoing gloom. When Bilbo, by chance and desperation, asked, "What have I got in my pocket?" and won, Gollum flew into a rage. He meant to strangle the hobbit, to take back his birthday present, the precious ring he had lost. As Gollum rushed past him in the dark tunnel, Bilbo stood with his sword drawn. He could have ended the wretched creature's life with a single thrust, but in that moment, something stayed his hand, a pity, mixed with a deep understanding of the loneliness and misery he saw in Gollum's large, pale eyes. He chose mercy over a clean, easy kill, leaping over the creature instead of through him. That decision, to spare a life, would prove more important than any blow struck with a sword in the wars to come. Bilbo used the ring's strange power of invisibility to escape the goblins and rejoin his friends, its true nature still a complete mystery to him. For decades, the ring rested quietly in a small hobbit hole in the Shire, a forgotten secret in Bilbo's pocket. He used it for harmless pranks and to avoid unwanted visitors, completely unaware that its creator, the Dark Lord Sauron, was also stirring, his own spirit reaching out across the lands, searching for the one thing that could make him whole again. The act of Bilbo taking the ring, and his later mercy in sparing Gollum, set two monumental forces in motion. It delivered the one weapon that could defeat Sauron into the hands of the most unlikely and gentle of peoples, the hobbits. And it left Gollum alive, a creature whose singular, corrupted love for the ring would later guide its final journey. The fate of the world now rested not in a fortress or a king's treasury, but in the quiet conscience of a simple hobbit and the long, tangled consequences of a single act of compassion. In the quiet halls of Rivendell, a council of the wise made a choice that would defy the very logic of despair. The burden of the ring could not be borne by one person alone, nor could it be defended by a single army. Elrond decreed that the company would consist of 9 walkers, a number set against the 9 terrible ringwraiths, but their true strength was in their diversity. A wizard, an elf, a dwarf, and men would stand beside 4 hobbits, a fellowship representing every free race in Middle-earth. This was not merely a quest, it was a living testament to the unity Sauron most feared. They set out from the safety of the last homely house, with a courage born not of certainty, but of necessity, their path leading toward the shadow of the misty mountains and the unknown perils beyond. Their camaraderie was a small, bright flame in the vast darkness, a bond forged in shared purpose, yet the conflict tested them almost immediately. Forced beneath the mountains by the cruel pass of Caradhras, they entered the ancient dwarven kingdom of Moria, a place of profound silence and deep shadows. There, in the echoing vastness of the 21st Hall, they faced a terror from the world's dawn, a Balrog of Morgoth, a demon of shadow and flame. In a sacrifice that would be sung of for ages, Gandalf the Grey stood upon the bridge of Khazad-dûm and faced the ancient foe. "You cannot pass," he declared, and with a shattering of stone and will, he broke the bridge, taking the Balrog down into the abyss with him. The loss was a physical blow to the Fellowship, the extinguishing of their guiding light. The consequences of that fall in the deep places of the world were immediate and devastating. Without their wise leader, the group's unity began to fray. Grief and doubt clouded their judgment, and the ring's corrosive influence found fertile ground in the heart of Boromir, a man desperate to save his city. His attempt to take the ring from Frodo shattered the last vestiges of their fellowship, forcing the ring-bearer to make the only choice he could, to continue the quest alone. But he was not entirely alone, for his loyal friend Samwise Gamgee refused to be parted from him. So the fellowship was broken, its strength scattered to the wind. One path led 2 hobbits toward the grim land of Mordor, while the others were left to pursue their own desperate errands, each step taking them further into a landscape teeming with peril, their fates now unwoven and their hope resting on the most fragile of threads. Two small figures now carried the fate of the world between them. Frodo and Sam turned their backs on the Fellowship and faced the Amin Muil, a labyrinth of sharp rock and despair. Every step was a conscious choice to walk deeper into a land designed to crush hope. The ring was a growing weight, a cold presence against Frodo's chest that whispered of futility, urging him to surrender and claim its power for his own. Yet he pressed on, his resilience a quiet defiance against the shadow in his mind and the desolation around them. Their path led to a landscape of pure nightmare, the dead marshes. Here the ground was a treacherous bog that seemed to breathe, exhaling a foul mist that clung to their clothes and filled their lungs. Pale lights flickered in the gloom, and looking down into the stagnant water, they saw the faces of the long fallen, preserved in the cold peat, their features frozen in an eternal, silent scream. The marsh seemed to pull at their very spirits, a haunting memorial to a war so ancient, its dead still slept just beneath the surface. To cross it required a terrible focus, to look upon that history of loss without being hypnotized by its sorrow. It was a test of will, a journey through a graveyard that tested their sanity as much as their endurance. Beyond the marshes lay their most visceral terror, the pass of Cirith Ungol, guarded by a horror older than Sauron himself. The air in the tunnel was thick with the smell of decay and a subtle, clinging web. This was the lair of Shelob, the great spider, a being of pure appetite whose only thought was a gnawing hunger. She was a creature of the darkness that existed before the Dark Lord came to power, and she served no master but her own belly. The confrontation in that suffocating dark was a primal struggle. Frodo, driven by a final, desperate courage, held aloft the phial of Galadriel. Its light, a captured star, flared in the oppressive gloom, a piercing shard of beauty in a place that had never known it. But it was not enough. Shelob's cunning was as sharp as her sting, and in the end, Frodo fell, paralyzed and wrapped in her hideous thread. His capture seemed to be the final, crushing victory for the darkness. In that moment of absolute loss, Sam's love overcame his fear. He did not see himself as a hero, only as a gardener who would not let his master be taken. With a cry of sheer defiance, he wielded the elven blade sting, driving the ancient evil back into her tunnels and rescuing Frodo from a fate worse than death. Yet this hard-won victory brought them to the most desperate point of their entire journey. Believing Frodo to be dead, Sam took the ring, feeling its immense weight and its seductive pull for the first time. And when he discovered Frodo was alive but captured by orcs, he faced the very gates of Mordor itself. The two hobbits were now separated by stone and iron, one a prisoner in the enemy's highest tower, the other alone outside the Black Gate, with the fate of all Middle-earth resting on his next, impossible decision. While two hobbits carried the world's fate toward Mount Doom, a king prepared a sacrifice. Aragorn, heir of Isildur, knew their quest was a race against an all-seeing eye. Sauron's gaze was a tangible pressure, a searchlight of malice sweeping the lands for the ring. To shield Frodo's fragile progress, Aragorn chose a path of absolute defiance. He would not hide, but challenged the Dark Lord directly, offering himself and all the armies of the West as a target too grand for Sauron to ignore. This was not a strategy for military victory, for no force of men could truly storm the Black Gate. It was a gambit of pure, desperate theater, a magnificent diversion played for the highest possible stakes. He rallied the weary survivors of Gondor and the knights of Rohan, leading them on a forced march to the very threshold of Mordor. Their charge was a declaration of war, but its true purpose was a whispered plea for two small figures creeping through the ash and fire beyond the mountains. The ensuing battle was a maelstrom of chaos and courage. On the Pelennor fields, the ground churned with the clash of steel and the cries of the fallen. Theoden King made his final, glorious stand, a bright flame extinguished in the tide of shadow. Eowyn faced the Witch King, proving that no living man could indeed hinder him, for she was not a man, but a shield maiden of unyielding heart. Each life spent upon that field was a note in a symphony of sacrifice, a price paid to hold the enemy's attention for one more hour, one more day. The cost was immense, a toll of countless lives that would leave scars upon the land for generations. Hope itself seemed a distant memory as Aragorn then led his depleted host to the Morannon, the very gates of the Land of Shadow. There, before the leering stone faces of the ramparts, they stood, a small and fragile line against a darkness that poured forth like a flood. They were surrounded, their doom seeming certain. In that moment, the entire war narrowed to a single, terrifying question: would their sacrifice be enough? Had their blood, spilled so freely upon the field and at the gate, bought the few precious moments the ring-bearer needed to complete his task? The fate of every soul in Middle-earth hung in that fragile, burning balance. The stakes escalated to an almost unbearable peak, where the restoration of a king and the end of an age depended entirely on an act of destruction happening miles away in the heart of the fire. Inside the mountain, the air itself was fire and ash. Frodo and Sam stood at the very brink of the chasm, the cracks of doom, where the ring was forged and where it alone could be unmade. The world narrowed to this single, terrible moment, the weight of every sacrifice, every hope, resting on Frodo's final act. But the ring had been whispering to him for every step of the long road, its voice growing from a murmur to a roar, until its will was the only sound he could hear. He had carried the burden further than any creature could have been asked, but here, at the moment of triumph, his spirit finally fractured. He turned to Sam, his eyes empty of the friend he knew, and declared, "I have come. But I do not choose now to do what I came to do. The ring is mine," and he put it on. In that instant, he claimed it for his own, and the world held its breath. The quest had failed at the very threshold of success, not from a lack of courage, but from the sheer, overwhelming power of the enemy's chief weapon. How could any will, however strong, resist a force designed to dominate all others? It seemed the darkness had won not through strength of arms, but by corrupting the very heart of its opposition. Yet this moment of absolute failure was also the moment of salvation, and it came from the most broken of places. Gollum had followed them, his entire being a single, desperate need for his precious. He lunged from the shadows, a creature of pure, ravenous want, and fought the invisible Frodo for the ring. In a frantic, violent struggle on the edge of the abyss, he bit the finger from Frodo's hand, and at last reclaimed his treasure. He stood there, delirious with joy, dancing on the precipice, but his victory lasted only a second. He overbalanced, and with a final, wailing shriek, he fell, the ring and its bearer consumed by the fiery heart of the mountain. The one act of mercy Bilbo had shown so long ago in the dark, The pity that had stayed his hand had now, through a tangled web of fate, saved all of Middle-earth. It was not a grand army or a king's valor that brought down the Dark Lord, but a mix of fractured will, violent chance, and a long-forgotten kindness. The consequences were immediate and absolute. A shockwave of pure silence rolled out from Mount Doom, followed by a great wind that swept away the shadows. In Barad-dûr, the dark tower trembled, cracked, and collapsed into a heap of dust. On the battlefield before the Black Gate, the earth shook, and the armies of Mordor, their will severed from the power that drove them, simply stopped, their forms dissolving into mist. The Eye of Sauron, a vast presence of malice that had pressed upon the world for an age, winked out into nothingness. His spirit rose as a shapeless shadow, torn by the wind and scattered into the void, never to take form again. The War of the Ring was over. The Third Age, an era defined by the long, patient watch against his return, had reached its dramatic and final end. This resolution carries a profound and humbling truth, that our greatest salvations are rarely the result of perfect plans or flawless heroes. They emerge instead from the unforeseen, from the consequences of small compassions and the chaotic interplay of failure and chance. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, a thread of grace we did not plant can still guide the outcome. But the journey was not yet over. The four hobbits, heroes of the Great War, finally crossed the familiar borders of the Shire, their hearts full of the simple peace they had fought so hard to preserve. Yet the green hills they returned to were not the home they remembered. A deep, unnatural silence hung in the air. The party tree was gone, cut down in the middle of the field. Rows of ugly, identical houses had been thrown up, and the lush lanes were scarred by the wheels of carts and the boots of rough-looking men who eyed the returning hobbits with suspicion and contempt. The Shire had fallen under a petty tyranny, a final, spiteful act of vengeance, orchestrated by the fallen wizard Saruman, who had taken refuge there to poison the one place the hobbits held most dear. This was the scouring of the Shire, and it was a test of a different kind. It asked whether the courage they had found in the wide world could be brought home to defend their own hearths. The stakes were deeply personal, a battle not for a crown or a continent, but for the right to live in peace under their own roof. Merry and Pippin were no longer the careless youngsters who had left. They were captains now, hardened by war and wise in strategy. Sam's loyalty, forged in the fires of Mount Doom, became a fierce determination to restore the gardens he loved. And Frodo, though weary beyond any physical pain, provided the quiet, unwavering resolve that held their small rebellion together. They did not need armies from Gondor or Rohan. They rallied their own people, the farmers and gardeners of the Shire, who found a hidden strength they never knew they possessed. With humble tools and a fierce love for their land, they stood against the bullies and broke the grip of fear. The conflict was swift and decisive, a final proof that the smallest of individuals, when united by a common cause, can defend their own. This quiet victory led to a restoration more profound than any coronation. The hobbits set to work, not as soldiers but as healers. Sam used the gift from the Lady Galadriel, soil from her orchard, to heal the earth itself, and new trees sprang up where only stumps had been. The Shire was made green and fair again, more beautiful than it had ever been, because its people now understood its worth. This final chapter was not an afterthought, but the true culmination of their journey. It showed that evil is not only a distant tower or a dark lord, but a creeping vine that can take root in any complacent heart. The Great War had been won on the Pelennor fields and at the Black Gate, but the peace was secured here, in the lanes and fields of home. It was a sobering lesson that the fight for freedom is never truly over, that vigilance and courage are needed in every corner of the world, no matter how small it may seem. A quiet tide began to turn, flowing not toward conflict, but away from the shores of Middle-earth. One by one, the elven rings lost their light, their sustaining power fading like a forgotten melody. With their purpose fulfilled and the dominion of Sauron ended, a profound weariness settled upon the firstborn. It was not a surrender, but a homecoming, a calling of the spirit back to the land from which their long story had begun. Their choice was a tapestry woven from both joy and sorrow, a bittersweet resolution to an age of exile. The last of their great lords, Elrond and Galadriel, prepared for the final journey, their departure signaling the true closing of the Third Age. What does it feel like to leave a world you have helped to shape for thousands of years, knowing you are taking its oldest songs with you? At the Grey Havens, the air was thick with the scent of salt and the soft, haunting sound of elven tongues. The white ships, crafted with a grace that would never be seen again, waited patiently in the harbors, their prows shaped like swans eager for the sea. For the elves, this was a return to the undying light of Valinor, a release from the circles of the world and its slow fading. It was a journey toward peace, a reward for their long vigilance and immense sacrifice. Yet for every heart lifted by the thought of home, another was heavy with the beauty they were leaving behind. They looked upon the forests of Lothlorien, now silent and dimming, and the halls of Rivendell, soon to be empty of all but memory. They were saying farewell to the very starlight that had first awakened them, to the rivers and mountains that held the echoes of their ancient songs. The last ship to depart carried a unique passenger, the ring-bearer Frodo, whose wounds of spirit would not heal in Middle-earth. His passage was a final gift, an acknowledgement that some burdens are too great for any mortal land to mend. As the ship slipped past the horizon, a palpable change settled over the world. The last living memory of the elder days was gone. The subtle magic that had shimmered in the woods and streams began to recede, becoming the stuff of legend and fireside tales. The age of myth and high wonder was passing, giving way to the dominion of men. The elves had carried with them a certain light, a way of perceiving the world that was now leaving with them. The forest seemed a little darker, the stars a little farther away, the air a little more ordinary. This was the necessary consequence of their departure, the price of Sauron's defeat. The stage was now cleared for the children of Iluvatar to write their own story, to build and to rule without the guidance or the shadow of the firstborn. The world became, in a sense, more mortal, more grounded, and perhaps more lonely. But in that loneliness lay a new kind of strength, the raw, untested potential of humanity to shape its own destiny, for good or for ill, in a world that was now truly and completely their own. A crown does not make a king, but a choice can restore a kingdom. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was crowned King Elessar, and his first act was not one of conquest, but of healing. He walked among the wounded in the city of Minas Tirith, his hands possessing the long-lost gift of his line, the ability to tend to hurt and illness with the touch of a true king. Where the shadow of the Black Breath had fallen, he brought a light that mended both body and spirit. This was the beginning of his stewardship, a reign dedicated not to amassing power, but to the quiet, diligent work of restoration. He understood that winning a war was only the first step. The true challenge was winning the peace that followed. How do you rebuild a world that has forgotten what peace feels like? His wisdom was reflected in the alliances he forged. He renewed the ancient bond with the Elves, ensuring that the wisdom of Elrond would not be lost to the new age. He stood as a brother to the dwarves of the Glittering Caves and the hobbits of the now flourishing Shire, honoring the small and the great alike. But perhaps his most profound act was the reuniting of the Dunedain. The Rangers of the North, the forgotten guardians who had watched over the lands while kings slept, were at last welcomed home. After centuries of wandering and anonymity, their loyalty and sacrifice were recognized, and the long-sundered lines of the men of the West were made whole again. The kingdom of Arnor was reborn in the north, no longer a memory in ruins, but a living realm under the protection of his rule. This was the fulfillment of prophecies whispered for thousands of years. A king who did not just rule men, but served all free peoples. The white tree of Gondor blossomed anew in the courtyard of the citadel, a living symbol that the line of kings was not broken, merely waiting for its hour. His reign stretched for more than a century, a span of such profound peace and prosperity that it became known as the Great Peace. Roads were safe, lands that had lain fallow were tilled again, and the arts of building and song flourished as they had not since the early days of Númenor. The long war had ended, but the true victory was measured in generations of children who grew up without fear of the shadow. The reign of King LOTR proved that the highest form of strength is not found in the wielding of a sword, but in the nurturing of a garden, a legacy built not on fear, but on the simple, enduring promise of a safe tomorrow. Yet even in the heart of the Great Peace, there remained a quiet ache that no victory could soothe. For Frodo, the wounds of his journey were not the kind that heal with time. The memory of the Morgul blade, the weight of the ring, and the burden of Mount Doom lingered in his spirit like a persistent chill. The Shire was saved, its green hills and cozy lanes restored to their former beauty, but for him, it was a painting he could no longer step inside. He had given everything to win this peace, and in doing so, had lost his ability to truly enjoy it. His decision to sail into the West was not a rejection of the world he saved, but a final, necessary act of healing. The ship that waited at the Grey Havens was a vessel of mercy, a passage to a land where the shadows in his heart might finally be lifted. He would not go alone. Bilbo, ancient and sleepy, his own long life stretched thin by his brief ownership of the ring, would accompany him, along with Gandalf and the great elven lords. This was not an adventure, but a quiet departure, a farewell to the very shores of Middle-earth. It was a poignant conflict, this parting, a testament that the deepest scars of war are often invisible, carried long after the last battle is won. As the white ship slipped away, it carried with it the last living memory of the ring's true burden. The legacy of the hobbits was now secure, their story meticulously recorded in the Red Book of Westmark, its final pages closed by Samwise Gamgee. That book would become the foundation of all history, a testament to the idea that even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Yet Frodo's departure asks a profound question of us all. What is the true cost of saving the world? Some sacrifices are not paid in a single moment, but across a lifetime, a quiet, eternal price for the peace of others. His journey west was the final chapter of his sacrifice, a gentle release that ensured the happy endings of his friends were not dimmed by his own enduring pain, a reminder that some heroes find their rest not in the world they mended, but beyond its furthest shores. The green woods of Lothlorien grew quieter, their golden leaves falling with a gentleness that felt like a long farewell. In the cities of men, stonework rose higher, and the songs sung in taverns were of human heroes, not of ancient elven kings. The Fourth Age began not with a fanfare, but with a slow, quiet turning of the page, a world learning to breathe without the constant, unseen presence of its first inhabitants. The dominion of men was now a tangible reality, a stewardship passed from the timeless to the temporary. This was not a usurpation, but an inheritance, a world left in the care of those who would live and die within its fleeting seasons. Their task was immense, to build a future upon a foundation of ancient legends, to explore a world suddenly vast and empty of its oldest mysteries. Would they remember the light, or would they forget the stories that gave their world its deepest meaning? The choice they made, to carry the legacy forward or to let it fade into mere myth, would define the character of this new era. Every road they paved, every chronicle they wrote, every child they taught the old tales, was a decision to honor the long struggle that had won them their peace. This active remembrance became their most sacred duty. In the halls of Minas Tirith, scribes meticulously copied the accounts from the Red Book of Westmark, ensuring the sacrifices of hobbits and elves would not be lost to time. In the rebuilt villages of Arnor, parents pointed to the stars and spoke of Eärendil, a mariner of hope, forever sailing the night sky. These acts of storytelling were not mere nostalgia. They were a tether, a way to weave the wisdom of the elder days into the fabric of their own mortal culture. The consequence of this choice was a world both diminished and full of potential. The palpable magic was receding. The forests no longer whispered with quite the same intent, and the world felt more ordinary, more knowable. Yet in that very ordinariness lay a profound hope. The fate of Middle-earth was no longer tied to the conflicts of gods or the doom of jewels, but to the simple, courageous acts of its mortal inhabitants. Their hands now held the loom, and they alone would choose the patterns to weave. The stakes, in their own way, were higher than ever before. The future was no longer about resisting a singular, overwhelming shadow, but about the countless small choices of everyday life, the slow, patient work of building a civilization worthy of the legacy it had been given. The light of the elder days was not gone. It was simply being carried now in a different vessel, held safe in the hearts and the history books of those who would one day become legends themselves. And so the great book closes, its heavy cover settling with a soft, final sigh. Every choice, every note of music, every act of courage and of mercy has been woven into this one immense tapestry of time. The world is at rest now, its heroes having passed into legend, its shadows lifted by the quiet, persistent light of ordinary hope. You have journeyed from the silent void, before the first song, to the gentle peace of a world entrusted to its mortal children. These tales are a shelter against the cold, a hearth fire that never truly goes out, They remind us that even the smallest of us carries a spark capable of lighting the darkest hour. Let the whisper of these ancient leaves be a comfort to you, a promise that stories of such depth and beauty are never truly over, but live on in the quiet of a listening heart. Sleep now, and may your dreams be filled with starlight on elven hair, the warmth of a hobbit's hearth, and the unbreakable promise of a new dawn.